welcome to the Sad Dad Games podcast. My name is Eric, and I love indie games. Welcome to Eric's Indie Corner. This is where we take a break from the sadliness and the dadliness of our regular episodes and take some time to talk about some of my favorite indie games. I'll pick an indie game every week to highlight and recommend. This might be a newer game or an older game, something that is popular or flies under the radar, but bottom line is it's my list, and I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about. And this week, the indie game we're going to talk about is a game called Owlboy, which is a very cool game. Owlboy was developed by a studio called D-Pad Studios, and it released originally in November of 2016 for Mac, Linux, and then it later came out on Switch in 2018, and then PS4 and Xbox One a few months later. So it's available on a lot of different platforms, but Owlboy is a really cool game. It's a side-scrolling metroidvania that focuses on really interesting traversal style because the main character can fly. So there's less jumping and platforming and more flying around and interesting combat scenarios and platforming that way. So Shan has played a little bit of this game. Shan, what are your initial thoughts on Owlboy?
The first impression that I had getting into this game was that it was one of the most gorgeous pixel art style games that I've ever seen. This isn't going to be like true 8 or 16-bit art style. They went for more of a higher fidelity, modernized version of pixelized art, but they were able to bridge old and new. I love the way that the art gave texture and depth to every scene, and that made it feel very immersive, and there was a very cohesive palette and style across the whole game that feels like they created an architectural language.
Yeah.
They have all of these artifacts. I was just blown away by the artistic prowess behind this game.
I would have to say that I agree. I like to do a little bit of research before I play games. I'll look it up and see the general consensus if people like it or whatever. And while I was looking into Owlboy, I looked at, I think, a couple of screenshots and watched half a video, and I was like, I gotta go buy this game because it just was gorgeous. Like, the pixel art is old and new, just like you were saying. It has an old school feel, but it feels very modern at the same time. And it's so high fidelity. And I particularly enjoy it does this thing where it zooms in and out with the pixel art. And so sometimes it zooms out far enough that it doesn't even really look like pixels. It just looks like a painting. And because the pixel art work is so fine and detailed that it just has this really interesting effect where it almost transcends typical pixel art where you think of these chunky squares. But Owlboy, everything
aliased,
it doesn't feel aliased. Owlboy feels really smooth and clean and beautiful, even though the whole game is built up of these harsh edges and these sharp pixels. And so I guess, with those initial thoughts, I want to jump into talking a little bit about the story. So you follow the main character, who is an owl boy named Otis. And Otis lives in a floating world where there's lots of floating islands and things. And he lives in a little town where he is considered an outcast. He has friends and people are generally fairly kind to him. But he really suffers from feelings of doubt and like he's not good enough, and he gets teased a lot by his classmates in the Owl Academy and stuff like that. But
like Rudolph,
a little bit. But something that
he's the Rudolph of the owls.
He's the Rudolph of the owls,
or the
exactly
owl
like that, or the owl man. 100%. That's exactly what it is. Rudolph boy. But I think one of the things that I like is oftentimes in video games you play as a mute protagonist as a way to more directly connect with the character, but they work Otis being mute into the story and they give some significance to why he's mute. And it's more than just the character doesn't talk because we want the player to connect with the character. It is more like it plays into the story of it, which I think is a fun kind of way to give it some context.
Mute point.
Yeah. Shan, I could see you grinning as soon as I started talking about that, and you're like, "Oh, I've got a joke locked and loaded."
That's where that. Nobody is more amused by my humor than myself.
That's the dad part of this Sad Dad podcast, is all of the dad jokes, mostly provided by Shan.
I'm really mad I didn't know this game existed till just now, because Metroidvania is my favorite genre of games. It's with Rise
I don't think that there's
pixel art.
I don't think it could be overexplored. Like, every indie could be Metroidvania, and I would always love it.
Yeah, there are definitely, there's no shortage of Metroidvanias. And I think that Owlboy is interesting in a way where it leans kind of Metroidvania, but also follows a linear-ish story. And so you go to new areas, but then sometimes you revisit old areas. So it's not like a hard and fast Metroidvania the same way that like Castlevania or Metroid or Hollow Knight or something would be. But you revisit old areas and you can go back and get collectibles and stuff.
So is it more like Control's Metroidvania universe where but yeah, there is some to explore.
Yeah, sort of like that. I'd liken it more to like a Zelda style of progression where it's, you visit older areas and things like that, but you can just move through it linearly if you want to.
Okay, so you get the grappling hook, you can then go back to other areas.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Also, Samus Returns.
A lot like Samus Returns, where it's like this area and you do this area and then you move to the next one. It's a lot like that.
But then you can circle back, do everything, find more depth, and then finish the story.
Yeah, it is a fully connected world, so you can just fly from one place back and forth to wherever you want to go. But yeah.
Another reference point to understand what.
Yeah, so we've all found our game to compare it to. Yeah, so I think the art style in Owlboy is amazing. The story is a lot of fun. It has a lot of heart. Something that I find really, as someone who enjoys art and someone who enjoys animation, the animation in Owlboy is particularly just really great. They have a lot of unique animations that will play only once or just a few times, like character interactions and they'll have a unique animation for certain scenarios and certain situations, and it makes the world really feel detailed and alive, and is really excellent. Animation is top notch. And it feels nice and smooth to fly around and stuff. Yeah, I really enjoy that part of it as well. And the music, I know Shan can talk to this a little bit because you haven't beat it, but you played it quite a bit. But I love when you boot up the game and it goes to that title screen. There's that beautiful image of the swirling clouds and Otis is sitting on a cliff. And then the title screen music comes up and it's just a fantastic soundtrack. It's good stuff.
I have not played it recently enough to recall any of the music. I was most taken by the art itself, but I don't recall the music catching my attention.
It is really good. I really enjoy it. It's one of my go-tos when I need something to listen to while I'm working or drawing or something. I listen to Owlboy soundtrack quite a bit.
So what's the nature of the story? What does Owlboy have to prove? Is it similar to Rudolph's journey in that he just has to prove
he wants to be
that he has
included
extraordinary worth as the runt of the pack?
It is a little bit of that. There are definitely elements of that. It has I'm going to compare it again to Zelda, sort of a story where it's like something happens and you have to go out on a big adventure. And this isn't spoiler because it happens in the first 20 minutes of the game, but Otis's town gets attacked and that kind of spurs him on a big adventure to stop the people that attacked from causing more damage to the rest of his world. And it leads into bigger and greater things. So it does have like a chosen hero, like Zelda Frodo style of story. Yeah, sure. How many points of reference can we connect to Owlboy? Yeah.
Well, I need one for every subject matter that we cover.
Perfect. Yeah, makes perfect sense. So it has the
perfect standard amalgamation, the mosaic of references that anybody else could understand if they want to pick.
There are no more original ideas in the world. It's just amalgamations of other things. And this one chiefly being Rudolph and owls.
Everything is Homer's Odyssey if you really
you boil down to it.
You boil it down.
Yeah. I fight Cyclopses like once a week.
Yeah. Who doesn't? Everybody does.
My Cyclops is depression.
I'm going off track here. So as somebody who doesn't really like platformers because I'm terrible at them, I'm interested to hear more about the platforming. You said there was a little bit different with the flying mechanism. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on how it differs from other traditional platformers.
Yeah, I wanted to lean into talking about the gameplay. So that leans perfectly into my next point is the gameplay and how that part of it works. And two, I'm going to give a little fun fact with the beginning of this gameplay. So the game was in development for about 10 years, which is a very long development cycle, especially for indie games. It was a pet project of one man whose name is, hang on, I got to check my notes. I'm going to feel bad if I don't call him out because it was a big thing for him.
Is it Santa Claus? Because this game is
Santa Claus. Yes, the game was made by Santa Claus. I will look at my notes and find it and come back to it in just a second here. But it was in development for about 10 years. One of the inspirations for the gameplay was in playing Super Mario Brothers 3 when you get the Tanuki suit and you can run and take off.
Mm.
And the idea of being able to fly around was so intriguing. And then he was playing Sonic and Tails and was really intrigued with the idea of Tails being able to fly and pick up Sonic, and then they could both go to different places. The gameplay mechanics are very interesting because Otis can fly. He can free fly anywhere. There's no limits. He doesn't have a stamina meter. He can just fly anywhere he wants to without restriction, with the exception of there are walls and stuff sometimes that obviously you can't fly past to keep the levels contained. But
Stamina as a mechanic can go to hell.
all right, Shan doesn't like stamina. Noted.
Yeah. You're traversing Breath of the Wild for 100 hours, and it's just like the primary gameplay loop is how far can I run before my stamina runs out?
And get Rivali's Gale. That's the first thing you need to get in Breath of the Wild. That
Always.
I beeline it there every time, and so I can actually traverse effectively.
Yeah, I see the power and stamina for climbing, but for running, I just wanted to chuck my controller at the TV. It's because it's not a traditional platformer. How they design the levels, I imagine it like this is my next reference, Donkey Kong Country when you're playing as Squawks in the level with the vines.
Yeah, there's some
Because
of
you
that.
can
Yeah.
because you can fly, they have to design it where you're caged. There are some open areas with connected tile map areas, but the game design is such that they're trying to box you in to make the challenge of flying over obstacles and around spikes and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that it is really strictly a platformer because you don't do a lot of actual platforming. You do a lot of
It's not
avoiding
really a
hazards.
platformer.
Yeah, you don't do a lot of jumping or anything. You can jump, but usually when you jump, you're going to fly. And so you do a lot of avoiding hazards in combat and solving puzzles. Something that obviously, as a big Zelda fan, I really like about this game is there are some dungeon areas where you go and you solve puzzles similar to how you would in a Zelda game. Keys and unlocking doors and fighting enemies
Lock
to
and
get
key
to
puzzle.
the boss at the end. Progress the story. So there's a little bit of that in there, which I personally really enjoy. And then one thing that I find really interesting about the gameplay is since you can just fly everywhere, the way that the developers give the player combat abilities I found really interesting because Otis can't really fight at all. He can dodge roll and fly and jump, and that's kind of it. And so what he does for combat is he has a friend that he'll carry around underneath him, which is where the inspiration from Sonic and Tails comes in. Tails can pick up Sonic and then they fly around. But in this one, Otis, you pick up one of your friends and then they have some kind of projectile weapon that you aim with the other stick like a twin stick shooter, and you can use them to shoot at enemies or hazards or to solve puzzles or whatever. And I thought that was a really interesting narrative thing and a gameplay thing to enforce this idea of teamwork. Even with this in a single player game experience, the story focuses heavily on like teamwork and friendship and building those bonds with the people he goes on this adventure with. And another thing that I thought was interesting gameplay wise is it also makes it so that when Otis gets hit by an attack, you drop the person that you're carrying. And so if you get hit or hurt by an enemy, you have this moment of panic where you're like, oh shoot, I have to go pick them back up so that I can attack again because you're vulnerable until you go back and pick them up. And so it adds an extra layer of wanting to avoid attacks, not just because it will lower your health or whatever. You want to avoid those attacks because if you get hit, then you're defenseless for a minute. So I
So
thought that was
I
interesting.
I have to call this out, and I'm hoping you can persuade me otherwise. This deuteragonist, this second character, I found to lack charm, and I wasn't interested. I was bored by his character. Why am I wrong? Do you find him charming and fun as a character? I loved Owlboy, but I
Yeah.
was a little annoyed by having to carry around this second player that I wasn't charmed by.
I guess that it comes down to a matter of personal taste. I will say, without spoiling anything, that you do encounter multiple characters that you can carry around.
All
So the
right.
first one in the first village is your buddy named Getty. Um, and he's kind of the main, like he's got sort of a pistol. It's just a pretty standard ranged attack weapon. But you encounter other people along your quest and get different kinds of weapons and different kinds of abilities and different kinds of characters. I found one of the other characters that you find later on particularly interesting. I thought that him and Owlboy had a good um, kind of back and forth relationship, even though Otis can't really talk. So I would say that waiting for the other characters to... He just says who. Hoot, hoot. But waiting for the other characters to come in definitely helps, because then it becomes more of kind of an ensemble thing and less just these two characters. But I will also say that I personally liked the first character pretty well. He didn't light me on fire, but I was particularly charmed by his animations, just because all of the animation in the game is so smooth and all the characters are so expressive. That almost immediately endeared me to basically every character. Yeah, I don't know if you got far enough in your first playthrough to get to
I
the
got to
point
the
where you
second
encountered more
character. I'm
people.
just now remembering.
Yeah.
I also, so between when I played it years ago and now, as we all know now, I had discovered that I have ADHD, and I realized that I'm not illiterate, but I don't like reading. And this game has enough dialogue at certain milestones of the game. They get very heavy into dialogue and exposition. And that's where I was getting bored, because I couldn't focus long enough to connect the dots. But it, I guess I'm reminded of the Owl in Zelda, where it's okay, get to your point, but then you press the wrong button, it starts all over again. I felt like I was playing, I was
I
like
thought
in
I
a
was done.
Groundhog's Day of dialogue. I couldn't get through it.
That's interesting. I don't remember. So I played a few hours of this game to kind of prep for this episode. I didn't play all the way through, but the first time, the last few times I played through, I don't remember being particularly bothered by the dialogue, which is usually something that I'm kind of sensitive to, is overly wordy dialogue.
I think it was like right before the third act, and it was like some rising action, and I probably just like they were building a lot of exposition, and I just like never turned the game back on again and got distracted by something else. It could really just be like not the game itself so much as I'm easily distracted, and if I don't finish a game within 3 days, I'm not going to finish it.
That's 100% happened to me before, where I'll get most of the way through a game and then I forget about it and I get distracted by a different game, and then I come back to it like 3 years later and I'm like, I just need to just start over. I have no idea what's going on. Like,
Yeah, I have a hard and fast rule that I can't start a new game until I finish the game I'm on, but I also have to block out a full week of being able to play things without getting distracted.
yeah.
And if I don't have it, I don't pick up a game.
Yeah, I don't always have that
Personal
rule.
problem.
I will often start new games before I finish my current game. It's a real problem. So yeah, I don't have a lot left to say about Owlboy. I really enjoyed it. I would say that it has some really great fun set pieces, some fun boss fights, some interesting kind of chase sequences that I really enjoyed. It's not an incredibly long game. It's about, depending on skill level and how much of the side stuff you do, it's about 8 to 12-ish hours. It's available on Windows, Mac, Linux, Switch, PS4, and Xbox One, and it is normally priced at $24.99. So not a bad deal. Check it out, pick it up. It's good stuff. All right. Any closing thoughts on Owlboy before we say see you next week?
Check it out. It's not one, when I hear platformer, it's not one that I kind of skip by it right away, but this sounds very interesting and a lot of different mechanics that I really appreciate. Clever mechanics, and sounds like this is right up my alley, especially with the combat mechanics.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was trying to get myself out of the AAA space, because I had played through all the big titles and I was trying to get into the indie space, I looked up the biggest hitters of the last 5 to 10 years, and this is, I think you would say it's in the top 20 list of indies all
It's a good
time.
one.
It always pops up on lists that get that long.
Yeah. No, I remember when you were doing that, because you reached out to me and you were like, hey man, do you have any indie games that you would recommend to me? And I was like, ooh, which is my favorite question to ever be asked by anyone in the world is, hey, Eric, do you have any indie games you'd like to recommend? And I say, yes, so many, all of them.
It's the question I always ask when I need to butter you up and ask for $100 or something. When
I
need a
put
favor.
Me in a good mood, ask me for a favor. You first need to let me talk about Hollow Knight for an hour, and then you can ask me for anything you want.
And you can do anything you want with me.
Yeah. All right. This has been Eric's Indie Corner, and we'll see y'all next week.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Outro. Bleep-a-doof, bleep-a-deep, bloop-a-dee-blow.